It's first look, week 8, reaching that midway point of the season, and this is the NFL Strategy Show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. I'm Dave Loughran. With me, as he is every Tuesday, Sal Vetri. Sal, it's a great day, man. Talking football, but also getting the first day of regular season NBA basketball, which, if you didn't see it, the NBA Strategy Show was right before us with Adam Scher and Josh Engelman. Be sure to check that out after the show. The Deeper Dive coming up, Live Before a Lot. We got a ton of shows on youtube.com/awesemo today, and of course at awesemo.com. It's a good day to be playing DFS, man.
Yeah, this next month or two is by far the best DFS season, where you have NBA starting up, NFL in full swing of things, and then also if you're somebody who likes PGA, that's still going to be all around. So yeah, I think this is just like the epitome of DFS in terms of the next couple of months. And yet today is, in my opinion, I like NBA in terms of playing it just the most. It's probably because it's a daily aspect, but now having that paired with NFL DFS, it's going to be great. So I'm excited about it. Yeah, I'm going to definitely have to catch the strategy show. I didn't catch it this morning, but I'll be catching that after. Then I'll be tuning in later today. Yeah, I'm excited, man. This is awesome. I love the NBA.
Well, so do I, and we're going to have a ton of NBA content. But you know what? Football's in full swing still, and it is a wonderful time to be talking DFS. It's Tuesday. It is the first look. So what we're going to do, of course, is give you our first impressions on what we've got for week 8. Look over snap counts, look over targets and touches and routes, you name it, everything from week 7, and apply that to week 8. And there's certainly a lot of interesting stuff to be considered. We'll start with a quarterback. And Sal, we talked about it last week. There was a core group of guys that really stood out, at least in my opinion. Many of them didn't end up doing what you would have expected. Kyler Murray was downright garbage. And the reason he was bad is because Chase Edmonds was so impactful, but it doesn't matter from a DFS standpoint. Daniel Jones was pedestrian at best. Matt Ryan, even before the injury, was pretty terrible. So all in all, it was a pretty ugly week in terms of the most popular quarterbacks outside of Jared Goff. I think, just off the top, I think this is going to be different. There are a few quarterbacks that immediately upon looking at this, I said, well, I know exactly who I'm going to have the most of, assuming, barring any huge changes throughout the week.
Yeah, I think a couple of guys pop off the page and like getting into it throughout the week. Like you said, some things might change there, waiting on what this Matt Ryan status looks like in a walking boot right now. But yeah, I think there's a couple right now that guys I have in as yeses on just a first look and an early look. And then there's even more of sort of a laundry list of guys that I want to dig down into. But I have like a core of like 4 or 5 guys right now that I think I'm going to feel confident about come Sunday that they'll be in a lot of my lineups.
So let's start it with Russell Wilson against the Atlanta Falcons, who, by the way, just traded Mohamed Sanu to the New England Patriots. That's an interesting one. We should start seeing more developments, and maybe if we get some throughout the show, we'll talk about them. But for now, that's one. They'll make him a better wide receiver than he ever was in Atlanta or in Cincinnati because that's what they do. But Russell Wilson going up against the Atlanta Falcons is just an outright excellent spot on really every front. Like, could Chris Carson come in and because they can't keep up, maybe Matt Schaub's under center and this game gets out of hand early? It's possible, but it is in Atlanta. And really their primary weakness, we've talked about this a lot, is their pass defense. Their run defense is not that bad. But man, just take a look at what they've allowed in the passing game. It's ugly. They're allowing 274 yards per game. They've allowed 17 passing touchdowns through 7 weeks. That is dead last in the league, along with the Atlanta Falcons or Arizona Cardinals. Just across the board, Sal, this has been a really, really bad secondary. They've allowed 28 passing plays of 20 plus yards. The list really goes on here, but I'll leave some for you because Russell Wilson against Atlanta has to stand out as a top play.
Yeah, he does. Like the only reason that, I guess there's a couple of potential concerns, but I think some of them are curved due to the matchup. So yeah, you have Atlanta, great spot. If Desmond Trufant comes back, that might be a better spot based on how he's been playing this year. 5 touchdowns in 5 games he's given up so far, but he has missed the last 2 weeks. So even if he comes back, that's not really a help all that much to their secondary and boosting it up that you want to get away from Wilson in this passing attack. So yeah, they're favorites. They're going to be on the road, I believe. So favorites on the road, usually you want to see this team as an underdog for Russell Wilson to kind of hit his ceiling because he's not going to throw a ton. But when you factor that they're on a road, it makes it a little bit more enticing there. So the price point is mainly the reason that I'll probably have to wait and see where I come in at. But yeah, I like Russell Wilson in this matchup. All of his individual players in the passing game, whether it's DK, whether it's Jerron Brown or Tyler Lockett operating out of the slot, are going to have positive matchups and really positive matchups here. Wilson right now is second on the slate, only behind Brissett in touchdown efficiency, and he leads the whole slate in fantasy points per attempt. He's just been fantastic. He has the upside on the ground. $7,200 in this matchup. I think it's a fair price point. It's just a matter of how you work your lineup around it. But yeah, he's one of the guys that I have a lot of interest in right now.
So right now, among all of the quarterbacks that we have, where would you rank Russell Wilson?
So probably right now he would come in as the guy based on the Matt Ryan news. If we're going to lean, and somebody said that the Vegas total said in the chat that the Vegas total is kind of indicating that they're leaning him to be out. If I have that information, I'd probably get to Russell Wilson the second most as of right now, but I want to see what pricing looks like lineup construction wise, because I do think there's a good amount of cheaper running backs still that you can work with and wide receivers. So probably second, but there's upside to be first depending on what my lineups end up looking like.
Yep. And things are always subject to change. It's still very early in the week. Right now though, the Seattle Seahawks have a 28.8 implied total and a 54 over-under on this game. As a matter of fact, the only teams with a higher total than Seattle would be the Rams against the Bengals, the Patriots against the Browns, and the Vikings against the Skins, and that's a Thursday night game. So if he right now is your second, who would be your first?
Yeah, and this is where it gets difficult. So there's like a top three that I have interest in right now. The top three would be Josh Allen, Russell Wilson, and then the last one, believe it or not, is probably going to come in and be Ryan Tannehill at that price point in the matchup. So I probably lean the most right now to a guy like Tannehill at 5,100, just because I usually like to favor cheap quarterbacks. But depending on once I start doing crunches, I'll really be able to tell. Because if there's enough value on the slate, then I'll get to way more Russell Wilson. He'll probably be the first guy I get to. If there's not as much value that I think there is right now, then I'll get to more Tannehill because of the price point.
Okay, so he is really cheap. You trust Tannehill in a spot like this because of that salary?
Trust, no. Like I'm not completely confident in
trust
that.
Trust enough to play him at a high clip.
Yes, yeah, I trust him enough to play him because of the salary, and then also the matchup. Like we talk about the matchup for Ryan against Atlanta. It's very similar to Tampa Bay's pass funnel of a secondary. And you know that they have a very good run defense, which Derrick Henry, sure, maybe now Tannehill, instead of throwing 29 times, they rely on him to throw 40 times. And that's where mistakes start to happen. But he looked very comfortable. And his interception was him getting hit on his blind side when he was throwing to the left side of the field. And it just kind of became a duck. So he looked very good. Again, if they have to rely solely on him, that can change, which is the concern if this defense stops Henry. But right now at that price point in the matchup, if it allows me to get to a lot more in lineups, then I can see myself getting a good amount. And then, yeah, Josh Allen somewhere in that top three because of the matchup against Philly, and he has a lot of rushing upside.
By the way, Timothy in chat said that the total dropped to 49. On every site that I use to reference, I haven't seen that. I'm still seeing either 53, 54, or it's offline. Are you seeing 49 anywhere?
No, I saw that in chat too. I haven't seen that anywhere. I was looking at mainly. I was just seeing. It was off the board. And then I saw like the look ahead last week. Some people were saying was at that 53, 54 spot. But I mean, yeah, if he does play, then Matt Ryan will be in that conversation as one of the guys I have interest in.
Yeah, I still see it at 54. I see a 53, a 53 and a half, but no 49. Going over the rest of the position, some other interesting spots, one of them being Deshaun Watson. Dude, Oakland just got absolutely ravaged by Aaron Rodgers and a banged-up receiving core without Devontae Adams. They allowed 421 passing yards. They just hemorrhaged yards on everywhere on the field. I mean, look, they even made Jimmy Graham look like a pretty competent football player who hasn't been dropping every pass, who hasn't been, looking like he's way past his prime. Marquez Valdez Scantling, a couple of big plays. Geronimo Allison. I mean, through and through, this was an awful showing for Oakland secondary. Darren Waller's still awesome on the other side. Finally, nice to see him get into the end zone. But talk to me about Deshaun Watson here at home against Oakland. Implied total right now for Houston is at 28.5. And I want to point this out to you right out of the gate because it's important. Listen to the teams this week. I will include the primetime games that have implied totals of 28 or higher because we have not seen a lot of this. Houston, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Seattle, New Orleans, Minnesota, New England, and the Rams. That's 8 teams with totals above 28. Sal, that's nuts.
Yeah, it's nuts. This is going to be a main slate where I'm assuming going into it that if you see like chalk coming in on specific players, because of, or even a game stack and team stack, if there is chalk, then it's very easy to get away from it because there's so many options. And then, we have games that top tier is loaded, but then you still have games in that like 25 range, which is still a fine total. It would be a spot that people would be gravitating towards on most weeks. And this week it'll probably go unnoticed. So that's another spot of it. Deshaun Watson, he's right there with the price point of Russell Wilson. They have similar features in terms of both of them on the ground this year, averaging similar rushing yards per game. Right around both Watson 28 and Russell Wilson about 25, both attempting over 5 rushing attempts per game. So they have that upside. They're the 2 top fantasy points per attempt players on this slate, and they profile out for both having very good matchups. I think that the matchup on the ground for this Houston team is better if they wanted to lean a little bit more on Carlos Hyde. Maybe Will Fuller's impact not being there hurts a little bit more. So if we're trying to split hairs between Wilson and Watson on the top end, I mean, obviously, if you're playing a ton of lineups, you can get both of them. I think I prefer Wilson a little bit better because I think they can bottle up this Atlanta defense on the ground. Carson more so than Oakland can bottle up Hyde, which might sound a little bit interesting. But that's where I lean right now in sort of a first look. But there's nothing wrong with Watson. I think Kenny Stills filling in for Fuller. It takes away your bigger play upside. But in this matchup, I don't think it's a complete drop-off.
Neither do I. And I really like DeAndre Hopkins early on. Yep. He actually played more snaps than at any point this season. Not that it makes a big difference because he's always around 100%, but he played 65 of 65 available snaps. It was the DeAndre Hopkins that we've been waiting for a very long time now, 12 targets. But I'll tell you this much. When it comes to DeAndre Hopkins, who we'll talk about later, I'm still not too worried. Yeah, he's going to have some bad games, but he could literally go on a tear and we forget all about some of these bad games that we've seen. 12 targets in week 7, 12 in week 6. He's had 8 or more targets in all but one game this season. And now Will Fuller is sidelined. I think there's a lot to like here if you're talking Deshaun Watson with Hopkins and then, Kenny Stills or even Kike Coutee, who had 5 targets. It feels like a nice way to stack this game or this team. I guess the question would be stacking the other side of it. I mean, would you go to a Darren Waller? Would you go to a Tyrell Williams in the event that he returns? I think there are options on both sides for sure.
Yeah, I think stacking it's very I would actually say, easy. You have a top price quarterback and a top price wide receiver, but when Kenny Stills is below 5K and Kiki's down in that range, it makes it a lot easier. And where the targets are going to be concentrated to, like those 3 players and probably predominantly for upside targets, Hopkins and Stills. So stacking it makes sense. And then on the other side, it's probably just Waller. Like Tyrell Williams, maybe he'll return. I really don't know when he'll return. Like if it's even going to be this season. If they come out and say he's out for the year, I wouldn't be shocked.
And guys that return with plantar fascia or plantar fasciitis, we've seen it before. A more recent example, a couple of years ago when Antonio Gates returned and he was clearly used as a decoy for like 7 straight weeks.
Yeah, even if it's like not that to that extent, just wide receivers with foot injuries, they'll be limited. They'll be battling it. They'll have to come back. So I'm not, for right now, like I'm not even going to expect Williams to play. If he does go out there, I don't have a ton of confidence. It's just Waller. The Texans have been good against tight ends, but haven't faced that many great ones. Austin Hooper, the best one they faced, and he had a good day against them. So it would be just Waller running it back with, and Waller's price is going to come up. It's still not up to where it's restrictive of you, especially in a stack.
Yep. And the guy is just ridiculously impressive. I love this kid, man. He's not even a kid, actually. He's been in the league for like 48 years. He just had a lot of issues. But yeah, it's tough not to like this spot. So that for me right there, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, 2 guys I really like. You already talked about Tannehill. Have you talked about Stafford yet?
No, I haven't, but he's another one that's in like the yes column right now for
Yeah.
me.
He's one of
Uh,
my top yes guys actually this week. But go
yeah.
ahead and get to him. Another team with a 28 plus implied total is the Detroit Lions, who will be without Curry and Johnson this week. Probably going to see quite a bit of Ty Johnson.
Yeah, and that's actually a really big piece as to why this is more attractive against the Giants. Like, it's a really good matchup to begin with, a good total. And Stafford this year, I mean, he's averaging over 36 attempts per game, which for a team that wanted to run the ball coming into the year, that's probably more than expected. And now, yeah, Carrion's supposed to be week to week. And Ty Johnson, who's going to be the predominant guy to fill in for him, even J.D. McKissick, they're now backup and third string running back with Carrion's in there. Both of those guys are probably more effective in the receiving game. So I would expect Matt Stafford going into this game, even if they get ahead, I would expect 35 plus pass attempts, probably closer to 40. They can give the ball to Ty Johnson on the ground, but he's much more effective and has more upside in the receiving game. And I think they'll scheme that way as opposed to how they've been scheming on the ground when Carrion's back there. And then it's just a matchup in general. Like we talked about it all of last week. I mean, these guys defending Grant Haley on defense, you have Grant Haley, Jenkins, and then Baker. All those cornerbacks are really negative matchups when they're going up against guys like Carrion and Marvin Jones, and even Amendola out of the slot's going to have a really beneficial matchup against Haley. So all positive matchups, and now the running backs are going to be used in the passing game more. So, or at least you would think so. Yeah, $6,100 in this matchup for Stafford makes a lot of sense. Doesn't have the rushing upside, but I don't think you need it in this spot.
Yeah, I don't think you need it either. I do wonder though, with how bad Curry and Johnson's been on the ground. I mean, is it even that much of a drop off?
Yeah, he's been weirdly just. I mean, some of the matchups have been bad, but just completely ineffective on the ground. I mean, his like one good game, he scored like a receiving touchdown that was somewhat fluky. So yeah, he hasn't been that great. And Ty Johnson in very limited touches, and even J.D. McKissick have looked okay. So maybe it's not the line all that much. Yeah, I don't think he's going to be missed all that much, especially if it's only a couple of weeks. And this team has really been surviving on Stafford's arm.
So with a preliminary look, some of the guys that I really like are Wilson, Deshaun Watson, throw Stafford in there. Talked about Ryan Tannehill. And then you've got a group of players, a group of quarterbacks in Jared Goff. You've got Josh Allen. You've got Drew Brees or Teddy Bridgewater. That's kind of where my interest stops. I had about 7 quarterbacks written down, and I've just talked about all of them now. If you have anybody else, we'll get into it. But right now, let's talk about guys like Goff, Allen against an Eagles secondary. Man, I wouldn't be surprised if they bolster that by next week. They need to. If they don't, everything's over. Season's already spiraling out of control. And then Drew Brees or Teddy Bridgewater against the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, another really good spot for Jared Goff coming off the game where he's very successful, not even using his wide receivers, rushing a touchdown to Todd Gurley, touchdown to Gerald Everett. And then they just go run heavy in the second half, but he had a good game. Now he gets Cincinnati, which might even be a step up from playing Atlanta. One of the right there, both those teams bottom 3 or 4 in the league in pass defense, overall defense. It's another good spot for Jared Goff. It's just a matter of his price points, at least in my opinion, it seems early on a little bit restrictive because I would rather get up to Watson. I would rather get up to Wilson, and you're not breaking the bank at that point to pay another 300-400 for them. So it's a good spot for Goff. He's going to be at home, so that's beneficial for him, beneficial for Brandon Cooks, who has major road home splits. It's a great spot, but I'll take the other quarterbacks who are have a little bit more rushing upside, in my opinion. But it's a nice spot. I guess that's where I can leave that one at. And then you said the other interest that you had were potentially, if Teddy Bridgewater plays, I'm probably not going to get to him at that price point. If Drew Brees plays, then we start to talk about it. I don't think Drew Brees will play. I know he said they're going to resume practicing, but we'll see how that one goes. And then lastly, just interest after that for me, I have some interest in Kyler Murray, but it's going to depend on Christian Kirk because they have not been able to run their offense the way they want to. Like Christian Kirk, they're not running nearly as many, like pretty much no 4 wide receiver sets and not nearly as many 3 wide receiver sets. And they're running a ton of 2 wide receiver sets, which is not helping Kyler Murray in this offense move the ball. Last week, obviously, Chase Edmonds just completely takes over. And against the New Orleans run defense, I don't think that's going to be the case. So if Kirk is back, you'll see a lot more 4 wide receiver sets and 3 wide receiver sets, which will also help Murray find more running lanes. So that's going to be the determining factor for me to see if Kirk's back.
Yeah, I think it is a big deal. I still don't know how much Kyler Murray interest I'd have, but it would make things interesting. I have a lot of respect for this New Orleans Saints defense. Even last week, there was some points put on the board late from Chicago, but in large part, man, Mitchell Trubisky looked terrible. This offense looked terrible. David Montgomery had 2 carries. Terry Cohen, amazingly, had 9 receptions on 12 targets for 19 yards. It was brutal. Allen Robinson's a flat out stud. He's really, really good creating separation against some good corners. But a lot of that production came in garbage time. The touchdown came in garbage time. This game was not even competitive throughout the second half. So, I think a lot of that is the Saints defense, and a lot of it is Trubisky. Did you see? I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but did you see that damning RPO? RPO. You have to look at it on Twitter. It was a guy that did a short thread on an RPO play for the Bears, where basically hold on to the ball if the edge rusher's coming at you, and make a quick play, on like a quick slant or a curl route. There were a couple guys wide open, right? So the edge rusher comes off the line, coming right at him. He has one guy about 6 yards deep, wide open, because the nickel came up into the flat and took out another receiver. You had another receiver on the left side, about 8 yards deep, wide open. Mitchell Trubisky didn't look or throw to either of them and took a 15-yard sack. You got to go watch this when you get a chance. He broke it down in pictures, but it's damning, Sal. And I think there's really no silver lining when it comes to what we've seen out of Trubisky this season.
Yeah, it's not, I'm not going to say shocking, but it's a little bit interesting, just a complete fall off from last year where he was looking good at points, surviving on the ground. But yeah, I mean, that's interesting because you have Matt Nagy, who's just orchestrating these seems like really good plays. And when you look at it like a Sean Payton keeping Teddy Bridgewater alive, I guess there's a good amount of it that just comes down to confidence in actually your quarterback play. So yeah, he was awful. I looked at like all these accelerated like films from last week. Is just one of the things that I do. And he was by far the person who was just missing the most throws. I saw at least like 4 overthrows.
Like, is it even an indictment on Matt Nagy when your quarterback can't make simple reads?
No, it can't. It can't be at that point, especially when you're scheming players open. Like you can only do that much of your job if there's players open. And there was 4 just overthrows, and one would have been a touchdown.
Yeah. Yeah. Christian Fernandez says the Bears took Trubisky over Mahomes and McCaffrey. Did they take him over McCaffrey?
Yeah, McCaffrey was in he went, I think, top 6. When did McCaffrey go? Was he 7?
Yeah, I thought he went like 7 or 8. Where'd Trubisky go? 3, 4, 2?
Yeah.
Wasn't Deshaun Watson in that draft too?
I'm not sure. I'm pulling up right now. Yeah, first round 8 overall was McCaffrey.
Was 8? And where was Trubisky? 2?
Pulling it up now. I don't know why I think he was like 1 overall, but I'm thinking just 2017, he was the 2nd overall pick to the Bears.
Was the second
right
pick.
After Myles Garrett. That was the Myles Garrett year.
Right. I mean, my God, that is brutal. That's brutal. Some of the guys that went at, look at this. Leonard Fournette. I mean, that's whatever. Christian McCaffrey, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Marshawn Lattimore, Marlon Humphrey. Dude, there were some really good players at the top of that draft. It's looking like Trubisky wasn't one of them, but there's still time. Maybe they can turn it around. I can tell you I'm not playing him this week against the Chargers, Sal.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the major concern there is they did put talent around him. I mean, Tariq Cohen and Allen Robinson is talent. And then you have Anthony Miller, who's getting healthy, and Trey Burton. They said they have talent around him. They have a very good head coach. So at this point, it's kind of on the quarterback. But yeah, I have no interest this week.
Yeah, I really have no idea. Do we have any news on Casey Hayward while we're talking about the Chargers?
I haven't seen any updated news, at least as of before we started on this. So yeah, I didn't see any updated news on him.
Yeah, all I know is that he went down with that ankle injury, and I don't know, those things swell up. It still won't be enough to put me on Mitch Trubisky, I can tell you that much. Let me just quickly get a little bit more elaborate here with you on Josh Allen. The Philadelphia secondary has been dreadful. Is it worth, though, going to a guy like Josh Allen when the only guy you have any faith in pairing him with is John Brown? Because like Cole Beasley, yeah, Beasley can get some targets. Beasley can put up some decent numbers. But really, when it comes to him, you're hoping for 10 to 15 fantasy points, and that usually doesn't cut it.
Yeah, I agree. Like, that's the thing there for Josh Allen is more times than not, you're probably not going to full team or game stack it. And if that's something that you like to strongly do, then you probably don't get to as much Josh Allen He does have a lot of rushing upside, and John Brown is a very good correlation with him. But I agree, like there's not a lot of upside, even if it correlates with Beasley or even guys like Duke Williams, Isaiah McKenzie on the outside. It could be like a milli maker type stack if you really want to do it. And I think the price point is a little bit high on Josh Allen. And that's one of the reasons he's kind of in limbo as a guy I want to play or not right now, especially with Kyler Murray, $300 less, depending on how the situation folds out. I will say that the Eagles secondary, it's been absolutely terrible. Jalen Mills, he came back last game. He was giving up catches left and right as well, but we'll see if that's any sort of boost. I imagine they put Mills on John Brown in this game. We'll see if it's any sort of boost moving forward because what is that, his first game in like a year or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see if that's somewhat of a boost. And the first game is really hard to judge when you have Amari coming your way the whole time. And he held his own for the most part, I think. I think he gave up like 5 receptions, but nothing too drastic.
And a couple of those were really, really nice throws and catches from Dak and Amari.
Yep.
He had an interception as well, I think.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, in the corner end zone. But
yeah,
I you know what? He really wasn't bad. You're right. He compared to what we've seen out of them, he was pretty good.
Oh yeah, no. Right now he has to be. I mean, it's a 1-game sample, and he's been hurt, so it's really hard to judge.
No, he's their top corner. That's what you're going to say, right?
Yeah,
no question. All right, let's talk about running backs here. I think we worked through quarterbacks pretty solid for a Tuesday. Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley are at the top. McCaffrey faces. Here's your real test for San Francisco, right? Here's the big test, and a very expensive McCaffrey. I think it's a test for both of them now that his price is up this high. The Redskins in a monsoon. Okay. Redskins rushed 104 yards on them, but the ball couldn't be moved anywhere. The Rams rushed for 109, Cleveland for 102, Pittsburgh for 79, Cincinnati for 25, Tampa Bay for 121. So all in all, the run defense has been good. Has it been spectacular? No. And have they faced a ton of juggernaut offenses? No, they haven't. So I think we should at least keep all of that in mind when we're looking at a situation like this. Right now, yards per attempt, the 49ers are allowing the 19th most, so somewhere near the middle of the league. They're allowing 90 yards per game. But if you take out that Cincinnati game, right, against a terrible Cincinnati team, and I'm not saying you should just take games out because then everything would be out of control. But all in all, they've been coughing up a pretty steady 100+ yards per game. It's still a very difficult matchup, though, and McCaffrey's still very expensive. How are you approaching him?
Yeah, he's very expensive. And like you said, everything that you said is completely true. The game total is not great. Right now, just San Francisco in terms of what they've been giving up to running backs skewed a little bit. Team total is not great. But it's still a guy who, like Saquon's right below him. And if Mike Daniels plays for Detroit, it's a tough matchup for Saquon on the ground too. And McCaffrey on the year is averaging, in terms of opportunities per game, 9 more than a guy like Saquon. So if you're hovering around that top end range, I do prefer McCaffrey over Saquon as of right now on a Tuesday. We'll see where that ends up. But you're pretty much paying $300 more for more times than not, probably like 6 to 7 more opportunities in a game that I think it's a somewhat difficult matchup, but based on the amount of volume you're going to get, especially in the passing game, I think it kind of neutralizes it a little bit. The game or the team total overall is higher for the Giants by like 3 points. So it's, again, not something that's going to make me get there. So if you're hovering around in the top range, I do want McCaffrey over Saquon, especially coming off a bye. So if there was any need to kind of get a little breather for him with all this workload, he just got it.
Yeah, this is a tough one because McCaffrey has just been so reliable, and it's not like Barkley is much cheaper than him. If Barkley was $8K, I would be on Barkley all day here. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's sort of where the conversation starts to come in with Fournette, who's right around that price range. Finally, his price is coming up, but it's still favorable for a guy who is second in the league in opportunities per game with 26 behind McCaffrey's 28.7.
Can I just point out, though, and I agree with you. Let me point out, though, this Jets defense really hasn't been that bad. Like, the Patriots scored with great field position earlier in that game. They scored a touchdown early second quarter. And then the Jets held them to 3 punts and a Tom Brady interception. I tweeted this yesterday. Sam Darnold repaid all of their hard work with 3 consecutive interceptions, a turnover on downs, and a safety. Like, they were on the field so much, but they made sure that Sonny Michel didn't look any better than he has all season. 2.2 yards per carry. He was dreadful on the ground. Sure, he had 3 rushing touchdowns, but thanks to really good field position. They couldn't move the ball on the ground at all. And many teams have actually struggled in that respect. Ezekiel Elliott mowed it pretty well, but the Jets have held the Nick Chubb and Cleveland to under 100, the Patriots to under 75 twice. They've held the Eagles under 90. Like, I'm just throwing it out there. Sam Darnold, that's one of the worst quarterbacking performances you'll ever see, and Luke Falk has had some bad performances this year. But the Jets, if they just even had a somewhat reliable offensive performance like we saw against Dallas, they wouldn't be allowing this many points. And I guess my only concern is Jacksonville does not have a high-powered offense by any means. So while I agree with it, Fournette is still very affordable. I like him a lot less this week than I have in other weeks.
Yeah, there's a guy that's a little bit cheaper and in the same game, so that gives it away that I like more based on the price point. But yeah, I do think the Jets defense has been good. They got back Mosley for that last game, and that was a huge increase in terms of their front seven. They're still without Henry, or the last 2 weeks have been without Henry Anderson. We'll see if that moves forward. He's probably their best run stopper. So if he's back in, yeah, it makes Fournette a little bit worse of a play. Still a decent-sized 6-point favorite, so I have interest right now. He's in a price range kind of by himself. I know that we're going to get to Gurley, but sort of by himself towards that upper 7K range. And yeah, we talked about McCaffrey and Saquon, and it's very scary to not have those guys or have a good amount of McCaffrey, especially each week. But there's a lot of options in like the mid-range and even some cheaper guys that you can get to, and I think you can feel comfortable with.
Yeah, a bunch of them. I'm curious to see what we get with the New Orleans Saints. Alvin Kamara was sidelined on Sunday in Week 7. And he's dealing with the ankle and knee injury. Doesn't seem to be serious, but I guess it's one of these situations where you look at this team. They haven't lost a game with Bridgewater at the house starting. They have a 28.8 total. They're 9.5-point home favorites. Like, unless Kamara is at full health, is there really any reason to rush him back when Latavius Murray is one of the best backups in the league?
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. That's the main reason. They're not like needing these wins now. If anything, they can afford a loss at this point. But the other thing with Kamara is like, we'll see on Wednesday what that practice report looks like. It might be a little bit telling, but I think they are sort of keeping this a little bit hush-hush on how significant it might be. One beat reporter said that it is a high ankle sprain. And then from there, the team hasn't really reported too much on it. So if it is a high ankle sprain, we just saw Saquon come back after a month from a high ankle. He had an issue with it in the game, but it seems okay. But also, it took him a month, and that's the earliest you can come back from. The guy's a freak. So if that's the case, like Kamara could be out another 2 weeks or so, maybe even 3 or more weeks. I don't think they rush him back. And if I had to guess as of right now, I don't think Kamara plays based on the information we have. But now if he practices Wednesday, obviously that's all out the window. But yeah, right now it's shaping up that this is just going to be a Latavius Murray chalk week if that's the case.
For sure. Jeremy Savage in YouTube chat says Murray's going to be dumb chalk. Dude, if Kamara's out, I don't know how that's dumb chalk. I mean, they are going to feed him just as much as they would have fed Alvin Kamara. They're almost 10-point favorites. He saw 33 total looks last game, 32 touches, 27 attempts. He doesn't have to average 5 yards per carry. Hell, he doesn't have to average 4. I'm not saying he gets 27 attempts again, but it's very, very, very likely that you see Latavius Murray come into this game and see another 20 carries on the ground. And look, let's put it real simply. Sean Payton and his coaching staff, and probably Teddy Bridgewater himself, they just want him managing games. They don't need him doing anything special. Get the ball to Michael Thomas and let Latavius Murray drive you down the field, pick up 5 yards at a time, and then move the chains with Michael Thomas as well. I mean, all in all, you could be in a whole lot worse situation than Latavius Murray is, and you already have a New Orleans Saints team that has no issues running the ball. They like to run the ball, and they're only going to do it more when they're ahead in games and when Drew Brees has yet to return. We saw it last season. Just because Mark Ingram's gone, I don't expect it to be any different. I don't see that as dumb chalk at all if Kamara's out.
Yeah, I mean, this offensive line has been great. They're going to feed him if Kamara is out, especially as almost a 10-point favorite in a game where they have an implied, a very good implied team total, actually. What is it, 29 implied team total?
Yeah, it's 29.
Yeah, I was surprised to see just how active he was in the receiving game. I think he saw 6 targets, 5 receptions. If you're going to get that at 5,800, and look, you might not get the same, but if you get 3 targets or 3 receptions for 20, 25 yards from him, and that's sort of almost the floor, around 5 points in the receiving game for a $5,800 running back who's going to see all the goal line work, at least a minimum of 15 carries on the ground. With this game script, I'd have a floor closer to like 17. Yeah, it's really hard to ignore a 20 touch guy at 5,800, especially with receiving game work. And he's a big size favorite. Yeah, it's really hard to ignore. 5,800. If the chalk's at like 30%, that's still fine.
Exactly. Yeah. Arizona allowing the 8th most rushing yards per game this season, 4.7 yards per attempt. Also in the top 10 or bottom 10, depending on how you look at it. And run defense, DVOA, according to Football Outsiders, has them as a bottom 8 unit. So and if you want to throw Pro Football Focus in there, they also have them bottom 7. So I think it's a pretty favorable spot for sure. And I'd almost prefer Alvin Kamara to be out, but he will be chalk regardless, so I don't really know how much it matters. What about Todd Gurley against Cincinnati? I find this to be a really, really interesting spot. Not making any judgments on it yet, but the highest total of any team playing in Week 8 is the LA Rams with a 30.5 point total. They're 13-point favorites, 48 over under, and most of that over under is attributed to this Rams team. Take a look at the Cincinnati Bengals, man. They're a terrible team, an absolutely god-awful football team. They're going to cough up a ton of rushing yards to their opponent. But when you look at Todd Gurley and you break down what we've seen out of him, well, Darrell Henderson with Malcolm Brown out saw a decent amount of opportunities last game. He was on the field for 26 of 72, or 26 snaps, 32%. Todd Gurley was on the field for 61%. To put that in context, he played 93% of them in Week 5. He was out Week 6, 76% in Week 4, 74% in Week 3. And like I said, 61 to 34 split. John Kelly, not that it matters, played 5%. But yeah, look, that's less than we've seen. And he was inefficient on the ground despite the amount of points that the Rams scored. What do you make of him here? Yeah,
so it is the best spot for a running back on the slate when you factor in total, when you factor in matchup, when you factor in the spread of this game. 7,400 is a fine price point. I hope, and we'll see on the ownership, I think tomorrow, but I hope that the negativeness around Todd Gurley all season continues, because I'm going to have a lot of interest in Todd Gurley. Look, it's somewhat maybe nerve-wracking that, yes, he's been injured. People are worrying about that since the preseason. Now there's a new injury. He comes back. He plays over 60% of the snaps, but he gets 19 touches. So it's not like they're limiting him in terms of giving him a workload. He saw 19 touches, 18 on the ground, 1 in the air last week. And he wasn't effective on the ground. So was Henderson Jr. And so have pretty much most, if not all, of the teams that have faced the Falcons on the ground. I mean, Grady Jarrett in the middle of that defensive line has been fantastic, and they rank as a top 5 run defense. Believe it or not, the Falcons, who have been picked on against running backs in the past, are very good this year. So last week, if anything, I'm encouraged by seeing, 60% snaps, but 19 touches. I think that number comes up if he's another week healthier. I don't see them having any reason, and if Malcolm Brown's out, to just give him 70+% of the snaps. And against the team that's giving up the most fantasy points to running backs, they're top 2 in terms of how many receiving touchdowns, rushing yards, receiving yards, all these things, receptions to the running back position. And now you have Todd Gurley coming in. Hasn't been catching the ball as much, but he did have a game, I believe, against the 49ers a couple games back, or the game before that, where he saw like 6 targets or a couple of receptions there. So they are okay to use him. I hope the ownership is low. I hope people still want to avoid him here. I will have a lot of interest in Todd Gurley.
Yes, I agree. I am a little bit concerned by just how inefficient he's been, and there's certainly the thinking that injury might still be plaguing him a bit. But if there was ever a remedy for his woes, if there was ever a get-right spot, this would be it. And just if you look at some of the basic numbers, because sometimes it's not a bad thing to do. You don't always have to go super deep. You don't always have to go underneath the hood to see what's obvious. The Dolphins have allowed the second most rushing yards per game at 161. 161 for the Dolphins. The Bengals are allowing 189 per game. 189 rushing yards per game. The Giants have allowed the second most rushes of over 20 yards with 8. The Bengals have allowed 14 of them. They allowed 216 yards to Jacksonville, 269 to Baltimore, 266 to Arizona. That's just their last 3 games. 175 to Buffalo, 259 to San Francisco. And the only reason they only allowed 66 to Pittsburgh, Sal, is because Mike Tomlin simply used Jalen Samuel and James Conner in the passing game as an extension of the run.
Yeah. It's It's the best spot. And look, there's another game. I think the Patriots are similar 13-point favorites. So guys like Sony Michel, but I think it's the best spot on the slate in this matchup, especially with the team total. And yeah, it's also a really good spot for Jared Goff in the passing attack. It's a good spot overall, but it is encouraging to see Gurley active somewhat to good in the receiving game over the last 3 weeks that he's played, scores a receiving touchdown last week. And he's going to be in there. Like when a guy has 2 touchdown upside in the best matchup on the slate at a $7,400 price tag, I think you have to have interest. And the only reason people won't is I'm very concerned about his knee. He might get injured during the game. I don't weight that at all. Or your major concern is, what if he only plays 60% of the snaps and sees 13 touches? We have yet to see that this year. Like when he plays the snaps, they are going to give him a workload. If the snaps come down, he still gets a workload. So if the snaps go up after another week of being healthy, it's going to be even better. So yeah, I don't really have much concerns about the injury. I get why the concerns are there, but what I saw last week, it is encouraging on 19 touches.
What about Le'Veon Bell against Jacksonville? Oddly enough, since Sam Darnold returned, they've decided that Le'Veon Bell no longer needs to be involved in the passing game, or they can't figure out a way to do it. 2 receptions combined over his last 2 games, 27 receptions through his first 4 games. So that sucks.
Yeah, that's a differing point right there. Is if he's not going to be receiving the ball, I can't get to him like a 6-point underdog.
No way.
Yeah, as a 6-point underdog, even in a good matchup against Jacksonville's run defense, which has been very poor this year, as a 6-point underdog, you need the 6 to 8 targets from Le'Veon Bell, run a ton of routes. So maybe they curve that and they realize like, okay, this is something we should do to take pressure off of Darnold and get him comfortable in the games. So I like the price point on Le'Veon Bell. I think that in this Fournette versus Le'Veon Bell in this exact same game for the $900 savings, I might be interested more in Bell. I want to see. That's the main point during the week that I want to see. But yeah, it's kind of like a question mark right now because the receiving game role has been taken away from them a little bit. Again, it's a positive matchup, if anything. I want to see what happens, though, also with this Jets offensive line. So we saw Le'Veon Bell have success last night in somewhat limited, like 15 carries on the ground against the Patriots. But I want to see what happens with the Jets offensive line. They've had 2 offensive linemen battling injury. If they get back and healthy, I have some more confidence in them. But yeah, 6 targets per game for Bell is much more down from what it was 2 weeks ago.
I really want to like Le'Veon Bell this week. I'm just telling, I do. I really want to like him this week. But it's tough. Do a little bit more research into that throughout the week and maybe come up with some other stuff. But
yeah. The only other thing I'll say is that's also bad for Bell is like the way that this team's moving the ball, not great. Like he only has 6 red zone rushing attempts. Guys like Fournette has 24. Fournette got not getting in the end zone.
Of course he doesn't. Dude, you're never in the red zone.
Exactly. And it's very much weighted by Luke Falk being there. But I mean, last game before the New England game, Darnold looked very good. So I think the defense was a big piece of why the New England defense, why he looked terrible. I don't think you're going to see that next week. Jacksonville's a positive matchup. So upside there for Bell, but I think the price point doesn't reflect it.
Okay. I hear you. Now, there are a lot of other options here at the position. I mean, Chris Carson against Atlanta. I don't know what David Johnson's situation is, but if he's out, there's Chase Edmonds, whose price has come up, basically the same price as Johnson. We can't get into everyone here. That's why we have the game-by-game breakdown on Thursday. That's why we have first look at ownership tomorrow and some other top options, top pivots and fades with Chris Spags and myself. But what about Austin Ekeler here? The Chicago defense has looked like a shell of their old selves. Sure, they've had an injury or two, but they're not getting pressure on the quarterback. They're not creating turnovers. They've allowed 424 total yards to New Orleans, 398 total yards to the Raiders in back-to-back weeks. All in all, they're still a good defense, but the run defense has apparently broken down. You look at the amount of rushing attempts or rushing production teams had against them through the first 4 weeks: 47 yards to Green Bay, 90 to Denver, 69 to Washington, 40 to Dalvin Cook in Minnesota. A couple good running backs mixed in there. And then Josh Jacobs erupts. Oakland rushes for 169 yards. Latavius Murray and company, 151 rushing yards for the Saints. What's going on here? And did Anthony Lynn finally realize and submit to the idea or to the fact last week that Austin Ekeler needs to be more involved if this team's going to have any chance of competing?
Yeah, so the biggest thing for right now, Chicago, is just Akeem in the middle of their defensive line. Akeem Hicks has been out now, I think, 3 straight weeks, and that's exactly when everything started to break down. I mean, he was just the biggest piece of their run defense in the middle. Since he's been gone, teams have just been able to do really whatever they want against that defense, and we saw it last week with the Saints taking advantage of it with Murray on the ground. So what I wanted to see was how many routes Ekeler ran out of the slot last week, and I'm pulling it up right now because I want to see how often they had him in the slot. So, okay, so he didn't run a ton of routes out of the slot. They're saying on Pro Football Focus, he only ran 3 snaps out of the slot. So he was on the field a ton out of the backfield, coming out on a lot of those receptions. Yeah, Eckler's price point of 5,900 is good. It's a matter of what do you think? What is your confidence in Melvin Gordon staying on the field for the majority of the snaps? He shouldn't, but that's just assuming that you know what the coach is going to do. I think that Eckler is their better running back. I think a lot of people know that. Eckler is only behind James White. Surprisingly, both of these guys more than Christian McCaffrey in targets per game. Eckler 7.57. The downside is he just gets no rushing work, less than 10 carries per game. But at 5,900, yeah, he's the guy that right now I have marked as an X, which for me is just do more research, look into it. Clearly just a tournament-only type of guy. You don't really want to have him in cash lineups. But we saw what he could do last week. And if you're Anthony Lynn, especially after how terrible that game ended for Melvin Gordon, literally fumbling the game away and losing it for you, I think you have to be looking more to get Ekeler on the field. He's the clear playmaker.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to. He'd only be a tournament play, but there's definitely some interest. Just it's an interesting spot is what it is, because I mean they've looked terrible lately, and Melvin Gordon fumbled away what would have been the win. How about somebody like Tevin Coleman, whose production has been has left us wanting a little bit, but last week it's tough. I mean, it was literally a slip and slide out there on the field in DC, but he had 20 carries in 3 games since returning, 16 against Cleveland, 18 against the Rams, 20 against Washington. Now they've got a home matchup with a good Carolina defense. Is Coleman cheap enough for you to say, hey, I'm on board with the amount of rushing attempts he's getting, or do you think you look elsewhere? And if so, where would it be?
Yeah, he's cheap enough for me to look at him right now. I think, and it's somewhat risky looking into it more. I think I like Ty Johnson more for $100 less. There's the risk that Ty Johnson and J.D. McKissic can just split snaps evenly, but I think Coleman is closer to an even split than it actually seems. I know he broke away with the snap count last week, but Matt Breida came out for the concussion protocol for a decent chunk of that game. Not anything drastic, but enough to kind of swing the snaps probably by a good 6% each way. So Tevin Coleman, he's definitely the lead back there, getting all the work. But I think Matt Breida, if he does, and it seemed like he already cleared this concussion protocol, came back into the game, I think he's still going to be a guy out there that's fussing around for 30% of the snaps, 35, and then they're going to have a 3-headed monster still back there. Coleman will see about 60% of the snaps. It's not the greatest matchup against Carolina, especially coming off the bye. So I probably lean to get away from him in that price range. I think I do prefer Ty Johnson with the news of Kerryon being out a little bit more.
I like Ty Johnson here. I mean, I worry a little bit, does Trey Carson get involved? What's J.D. McKissic's role? But I think Ty Johnson will have the opportunities to be the guy that gets a lot of the work here, and I'm cool with that. Anybody else at running back before we talk wide receivers?
No, nobody who's like an interest. Ty Johnson was the last guy, and I think another reason why you have a little bit more confidence in Ty Johnson is he's a rookie that they let kind of show what he can do and make the team in the preseason, whereas J.D. McKissic has just been this cog that they've picked up, and I think you want to see more upside out of your rookies. But nobody else. I think that Joe Mixon's price point is just reaching a bottom-up floor, but this offensive line is just so bad. I mean, if you're going to have 10 rushing yards over 2 weeks or whatever it is, you can't even get there even if the guy's this cheap.
All right, wide receiver. We'll hit on this now. Before we do, though, awesemo.com/join. That's how you can get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus membership. We've got NBA starting today. We've still got NFL in full swing. We've got NHL and so much more. All of our top tools, our best tools that are loved by the industry and created and used every day by Alex Baker, Awesemo himself, the number one ranked DFS player in the world. All of those tools are at awesemo.com, AWESEMO. Awesemo.com/join. When you sign up, use the code NFL Strategy, all one word, NFL Strategy. It'll get you 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus subscription. If you kind of just want to wade slowly into the water, we've got our Express Passes, $3.95 a week, and a whole lot more. And actually, if you're at the landing page, awesemo.com/join, and you click on Begin Membership, we ask you a quick question, just what type of player you are, casual, serious, professional, and we try and cater the package, the subscription, to your style of play so you don't get too much and you don't get too little and you're spending just the right amount. So use that code NFL Strategy. Head over to awesemo.com/join after the show. All right. Sal, what about DeAndre Hopkins coming off his second best game of the season? His first one was a monster, opening day game against the Saints. And then he had really been quiet, but he looked great. He's still getting a lot of looks. and now Will Fuller is doubtful to play. I personally like DeAndre Hopkins a lot this week.
Yeah, DeAndre Hopkins' week could have been even bigger last week. There's a really weird play where Watson was ruled down on a sack. He wasn't down. They just said like in the grass, but he was still throwing, and Hopkins caught a touchdown. It was very weird that they ruled it down, but it didn't count. Could have been even a bigger week for him. Yeah, it's a matter of if you want to work around him and justify the price point. Like at that point at 8,100, you are building your lineup probably if you're stacking him with his quarterback just around those guys. $8,100, it probably leans me to get away from more of him than I would usually like. But yeah, with Will Fuller out, he's already the primary option, but now even downfield, probably more so than Kenny Stills, because we've seen a couple weeks now straight where he's been used more so in the short passing game, which is odd, more of a chain mover. But Hopkins, yeah, 8,100, if you want to pay for it, it's completely fine, averaging right around 10 targets per game. I have him right now as an X just to look more into it. And that's mainly just around, if I play Hopkins, what does lineup construction look like around that, as opposed to like other guys who are cheaper, even Stills on his own team for like $3,000 less. So it's just working around the price point, but there's no reason to say anything bad about Hopkins in this matchup.
All right. Yeah, the only question is, right, what do you do with the top priced running backs? And does Hopkins take away from that? Michael Thomas against Arizona. Here's another interesting spot. Patrick Peterson returned last week. He's one of the better corners in the game. Do you see Michael Thomas as somebody that you will likely have a lot of? And again, he is very much the same price as DeAndre Hopkins. So if you like Hopkins, but you're worried about roster construction, it could be something very similar for Michael Thomas here.
Yeah, I prefer Hopkins. The matchup is scary. But again, he's going to see a ton of volume if Kamara does miss. We have to check in on that. A very good team total here. If Drew Brees comes back, even better for him. But Teddy Bridgewater hasn't been anything bad. But the upside for Thomas is that last week and on the season, he's running about a third, if not more, of his routes out of the slot. So they will move him around to have beneficial matchups. I wouldn't be surprised if this week he runs even more just to avoid Patrick Peterson.
Pro Football Focus currently, it can change, has him in shadow coverage.
Yeah, that would make sense. So, yeah, not a great matchup. For $100 more, I prefer DeAndre Hopkins in there where there's nobody on Oakland, especially after trading away their best cornerback or one of their best cornerbacks. Nobody there to really guard Hopkins. At that point, I do prefer Hopkins to Michael Thomas. And yeah, Patrick Peterson is a scary matchup. Last week, we saw him have a lot of success when he was on the outside receivers, and even Golden Tate when he moved to the outside against the Giants.
Matt Ryan has not been ruled out for week 8. So we saw Dan Quinn, head coach of the Falcons, say that he wouldn't define Ryan's injury as a high ankle sprain, but his availability obviously is still in jeopardy. If Ryan plays, what do you do with Julio? And Matt Hudson in YouTube chat asked if we could touch on Calvin Ridley a bit, which I definitely think we should spend some time on, and we will throughout the week now that Mohamed Sanu is the newest member of the New England Patriots.
Yeah, so if Matt Ryan does play, Julio has interest definitely in stacks. If I'm just going for one-off top-end receivers, it's, again, DeAndre Hopkins just because of the matchup, and, again, Fuller's going to be out. So I just prefer Hopkins because the price point isn't that much different. Julio, again, we know, like, one-on-one coverage isn't too bad of an issue for him. He had Ramsey and what was pretty much shadow coverage last week, even though I don't think it was labeled that, and he did fine. Like, he had, I think, 6 catches for almost 100 yards against him. And now Julio will have Shaq Griffin, who's been very good, but definitely worse than Ramsey. So the matchup doesn't really concern me. Double teams are always there for Julio. Hopkins, though, he'll surely see double teams this week, more of them, but against much worse defenders. So for the price point, I'll take that. Like in the top end range from the Julio and above, it's definitely Hopkins for me. It starts to become a question when we get to that Chris Godwin Cup range where it's now you're saving like around $1,000
Right.
Hopkins.
Mohamed Sanu has played more snaps than any receiver, any player outside of Matt Ryan.
Yeah.
This season for Atlanta. He's played 390 snaps out of 474. So, I mean, when you look at that and you say, okay, he's played 83% of the snaps. Now he's out of Atlanta. What do you see? Oh, I'm sorry. Austin Hooper's played a few more than him, but at receiver, no one's played more. How do you see this shaking out? I mean, you have to assume that Calvin Ridley now sees more opportunities and Julio Jones keeps doing what he's doing.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that this is going to benefit a couple of people. I think that if I had to guess, so what they have at wide receiver now is Julio, Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage, and then Justin Hardy. And the guy to step in at slot receiver, I would imagine, is Ridley, unless they want to put more Justin Hardy on the field. But they're a much better offense, and it depends on how much they care about winning now. But they're a much better offense on the outside with Julio on the outside, Russell Gage, and then Calvin Ridley in the slot, as opposed to Ridley on the outside, Julio on the outside, and Justin Hardy in the slot, at least in my opinion. I'd rather have Gage over Hardy on the field for a bigger option on the outside. So I think it's a bonus for Ridley. Like, we want wide receivers in the slot, and if it gets him on the field more, even better. Like, yeah, Sanu has played 233 slot snaps alone, just out of the slot. So that is a big piece. They run a ton of 11 personnel. If Ridley is going to have his snap count bumped up, because Ridley doesn't play a ton of snaps, believe it or not. Like, if he's going to have his snap count bumped up now because he's going into the slot and taking on that role, yeah, I like it. I think, like, just in terms of the entire team, it helps Hooper the most. Like, you're losing that piece of a cog in the middle of the field, and Hooper's already been reliable. It's just going to be more work for him, I believe. But I think that the way that this works is Russell Gage becomes an option on the outside, which sure, in this offense, I guess he can be in play with Ryan just going to throw 40 plus times a game based on this defense. But I think Ridley's the guy who benefits probably the most because he'll move into the slot.
I think so too. And I don't know how much use he'll have out of the slot, but he should have more, and it should increase his snap counts. If he played like 80+% of snaps this week, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. That's what I would expect to see here. Like you said, he isn't playing that many snaps. Hey, how about Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf going up against Atlanta? Lockett's not cheap. His price is up there, and there's always that concern that this guy is averaging for what is a top, for what many consider a top receiver. It is a little bit concerning. The biggest thing for me that he's averaging, fewer than 7 targets per game. And outside of 2 games where he saw 12 and 14 targets, he's seen 2, 4, 4, 5, and 7. I don't like that, but I do absolutely love this matchup. You've got DK Metcalf as well, who both of these guys are certainly priced up. You see the dynamic pricing sites like DraftKings pricing them up. But yeah, Metcalf coming off a 4-target week. There was a brutal fumble in that game when he went to switch hands and tuck the ball. But, he's young. Hopefully that is in the rearview mirror and we have some amnesia. But I do think that this is just one of the most premier spots that a wide receiver can draw. And it's kind of like wherever on the field. What's he going to see? Isaiah Oliver, Lockett in the slot is going to see, was it Casey?
Yeah, Casey's in the slot.
So, dude, it's a really bad Atlanta defense, and I'm willing to look in multiple spots for this Seattle wide receiver core this week.
Yeah, so like at the top, if you're stacking Russell Wilson, these are the 2 guys you go to and you feel good about it because they have good matchups and you want to stack. If you want to play them individually, the context of the slate makes it a little bit harder. In terms of Metcalf, yeah, they're both going to have great matchups. You probably have KZ in the slot against Tyler Lockett. That's a huge bonus of a matchup. For Tyler Lockett, Casey's given up 120 passer rating against DK Metcalf. Say Desmond Trufant comes back. I hope he comes back. It's probably better, honestly, the way that Desmond Trufant has been playing this year. Trufant has given up. These are just crazy numbers. Is what Trufant has given up this year. He's given up 5 touchdowns through 5 games and 247 yards. Just terrible numbers. And then if he's out, you're probably going to have Kendall Sheffield. I think probably over Oliver, but we'll have to see. Just because Sheffield has like 40 more pounds on Oliver, and DK is a huge receiver, so. What it comes down to for me is if you're not stacking it, I probably don't get the DK just because we'll get to it. But that wide receiver range down there is just loaded. You have Corey Davis in a very good matchup. You have Kenny Stills in a better role matchup. Christian Kirk, if he comes back, like all those guys for the cheaper, I prefer with their roles and their matchups. But then Tyler Lockett, yeah, he's right next to Chris Godwin, who I have interest in both of them. But Tyler Lockett's matchup is so good. And the concern here is that always with Seattle, they never really pass a lot unless they get down, and now they're favorites. The positive there is they're favorites on the road, which Atlanta should be able to keep it closer or at least neutral, if not potentially more times than not since they're home, take a lead on Seattle and force them to throw more. And then also you have the fact that Atlanta's run defense is good, so you probably rely more on Russell Wilson. So I actually like Lockett. The price point is concerning for like his inconsistency, but Lockett and Godwin is going to be a tough decision, and I might just have like equal shares of both depending on how often, because I'm probably not going to get to much Seattle overall stacks compared to some of the other spots. So Lockett, I'll probably have more of as a one-off if I had to guess.
It is a very interesting spot for Chris Godwin too, though. He's running almost 70% of his routes out of the slot. And I talked about this quite a bit last week with Logan Ryan. He has been targeted more than any other corner in the slot, 42 times. He had a number of defended passes last week, though. It looked like Keenan Allen was finally going to break out of this. He had like 64 yards in the first half. But But listen, in slot coverage, no one's been targeted more than Logan Ryan. Actually, the next closest is Justin Coleman at 37. He's allowed the fourth most yards in the slot. 131 yards after the catch is the third most in the slot. Yards per snap, he's not super high up there, but he's getting targeted so much that it kind of doesn't matter. I don't think he's terrible, but teams targets and volume are the most important thing when it comes to football. Teams are not afraid to throw at Logan Ryan.
Yeah, they're not afraid to throw at him, but he's been very good. Now, the upside for Chris Godwin's not like your stereotypical slot receiver, your Adam Humphries, or just your shorter receiver. It's sort of like Mohamed Sanu. Like Chris Godwin is probably, if I just had to guess, he'll have somewhere near, 20 pounds on Logan Ryan, maybe right around there. 15 to 20 pounds, which is an upside for Chris Godwin just in the matchup. Chris Godwin's been fantastic. But Logan Ryan, like so far this year, out of all the cornerbacks in the slot and just in general who have played at least 100 coverage snaps, he has the second best passer rating against in terms of being good for him. It's like in the 60s. Yep. I think it's mid.
But they're still throwing at him a ton.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like he's holding up as this good of a cornerback, even with all that volume coming his way. So it's a concern, but I do think the matchup is worrisome for Godwin. But Godwin's just been so good, and then you factor in just the size advantage he has, especially around the red zone at 7,100. I mean, in that price range at 7,100 with Godwin compared to Lockett. Right now, I think I prefer Lockett slightly because of the matchup overall, but that's not to knock Godwin at all.
Yeah, and also just to throw this out there, you've got the Titans who have faced, like Baker Mayfield, been terrible this season. Jacksonville, Buffalo, Denver, Phillip Rivers has not looked good. I do definitely think, and I'm not saying Jameis Winston is a stud, but I do definitely think there's an element of Tennessee pacing some pretty bad passing teams as well. But no, you're right. Look, it's definitely, there's two sides to this. One, teams are gunning at Logan Ryan. Two, he has made them pay for it on a number of instances. But I think the price point on Godwin is still pretty reasonable based on the ceiling that this guy has. What about the Rams passing game with guys like Kupp and Woods and Brandon Cooks against Cincinnati?
Yeah, it's very similar to what it was last week in terms of where they're all priced. Kupp comes up, I think $100, and they all were doing fine. Like in the first half, they all were around like the 45 to 50 yard range. They each had 4 catches, I believe. And then the second half, it just became the running show because they got up big on Atlanta. So Atlanta just didn't hold up their end of the bargain on that potential shootout. So there's no concerns there. Like Goff played well. They just didn't have to throw the ball a ton. So coming into this matchup, they're all in play. Like this is the concern is, do you want to heavily favor Todd Gurley? Do you want to heavily favor the pass catching game or the receiving game? And I think that you can just have pieces of both of it. Yeah, Kupp's fine at 7,500. He's the first guy that I know Hopkins is all the way up there, but he's the first guy that I probably get to the most. And I probably prefer him over guys. Maybe I have to see this one over guys like Godwin and Lockett. I'm not sure where I come in on that right now, but then yeah, you have the cheaper guys. I do like Brandon Cooks the most this week. Mainly it's been Kupp the most week in and week out, but now at this price point and he's coming back home. He just has insane home road splits in terms of his touchdown upside. I like Brandon Cooks the most at 5,700. These outside cornerbacks, they've been injured. They're going to be injured. They're third and fourth stringers on the outside with no Kirkpatrick for at least 3 more weeks and no Jackson the third. So it's a really good matchup on the outsides. Kupp has a fine matchup in the slot against BW Webb. We saw last week what happened. He finally had his worst game, Webb, but I think I prefer Cooks the most.
All right. Any interest in John Brown? We can make this quick because we still got to get to tight end.
Yeah, interest in John Brown. We talked about how bad the secondary is. Jalen Mills will be on John Brown, which is it's going to be worse than expected for John Brown, but that doesn't mean it's an awful matchup. So there's interest in John Brown, the only guy in the Bills passing game I have interest in.
All right. Talk to me about any cheap receivers here. I mentioned DK Metcalf. I think he's a very much a boom or bust option, but if he ended up having, 5 for 70 and 2 touchdowns, I wouldn't even be a little bit surprised against Atlanta. I think that price point's reasonable. Can you get on board with anybody and I'll throw a couple names out there and feel free to riff on them. Robbie Anderson, 4,900, DJ Moore, 4,900. Those are the guys, under the 5K range. Emmanuel Sanders, 4,600. So there are guys that are not really appealing plays from week to week, but there they are. I think you already mentioned him, so I'll throw it back out there. But Corey Davis at that price point is certainly appealing, especially seeing that Ryan Tannehill is not afraid to look his way when Marcus Mariota had very little interest in it.
Yeah, Corey Davis at $4,400 has been like in that last game, clearly the favorite option of Tannehill. But when Tannehill came in the second half, the third quarter, he threw the ball 5 times to Corey Davis. Like he's only been eyeing down, not only he's looking at AJ Brown as well, but he's eyeing down Corey Davis. He's not looking in the middle of the field as much like the Delaney Walkers, who has been hurt. Adam Humphries is getting more involved, but he's mainly looking on the outsides, which is good. That's what you want in fantasy, an aggressive quarterback who is not making mistakes so far through a very small sample of a game and a half. I have a lot of interest in Corey Davis, and I have a lot of interest in AJ Brown. Like, if you want to play Tennessee stacks this week, this is the week to do it against Tampa Bay's secondary. It's not something I have a ton of like confidence in or feel good about, but everything is lining up. It's a team that stops the run. Derrick Henry potentially gets stopped here by Tampa Bay. They throw the ball 35 plus times to Ryan Tannehill, and you have options on the outside that both AJ Brown and Corey Davis are. One has a ton of speed and size, and the other one has a ton of speed and size. So they're good matchups. I like both of them. $4,100 for Brown, I think, is in play. Corey Davis is in play. I prefer Corey Davis to Brown if you're just picking one, but they're both cheap enough. Then also down in that range, if Christian Kirk plays, $4,700 is too cheap for a guy who's going to be in the slot. New Orleans has been good, mainly for the most part on the ground, but still for $4,700, I'll take that for a guy averaging when he plays 9.3 targets per game. And then Kenny Stills moving into maybe the Will Fuller role for only $4,700. I think I feel good about him seeing 6+ targets at that price point.
All right, I'm going to ask you one more here because we need to discuss it. It looks like AJ Green probably won't play again. He'll need to log full practices if he's going to play. Alex Erickson played 94% of the snaps. He played more than Auden Tate, a couple less than Tyler Boyd, but those three guys all played 90+% of snaps. Damian Willis played 6 of 72 snaps, and that was the only other receiver to see any time on the field. At one point, Alex Erickson had all of Dalton's completions and all of his yards at 5 for 110, and that was in the third quarter. He's seen 20 targets over his last 2 games. It's not a favorable matchup. Andy Dalton has been brutal, but I would be remiss to not at least talk about Alex Erickson here, who is close to minimum salary this week.
Yeah, he's been good now. This last week was obviously the big week, but the week before you saw his snaps hit up to the 70% range. So they came up. And yeah, he was good. He's been good for 2 weeks straight. Obviously has a ceiling game. Yeah, I remember looking at it and it was like Andy Dalton has 114 yards and then Alex Erickson has 114 yards. And then the touchdown, I think, to Mixon. But yeah, Erickson at 3,700. I lean him more of a cash play right now, and I think he's a pretty good cash play based on what he's been doing lately, and I don't think there's going to be any AJ Green anytime soon. So I don't think I'm going to get there as much in tournaments. He'll move all around the field. Like Tyler Boyd will be mainly in the slot, but not for the whole game. So he'll have some matchups on the outside against Troy Hill, not good. Some matchups in the slot where he'll probably have a negative advantage against Robbie Coleman. But I think it's okay at 3,700. Like, it's not a guy that I want to get into tournaments. I think you have a lot more upside for $400 more in AJ Brown and $700 more definitely in Corey Davis for their matchups. But in cash at 3,700, yeah, it allows you to unlock other pieces of your lineup.
All right. Let's talk about tight end, then we'll head out. Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, by the way, is the sponsor of the NFL Strategy Show, running the $250,000 baller this week, $25,000 to first. But you got to check out what they've got rocking for NBA today. 20K baller, 3K to first. Tomorrow, 10K to first with the 50K baller. That's the first big NBA slate of the season that we're going to get. So we've got NFL, we've got NBA, all of them over at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. And you can get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points, those YSRPs, as good as cash, by simply signing up with us at awesemo.com. Just use the link for the NFL column or NFL tab in the articles. You'll see it. The free primetime articles. The Yahoo link is right at the top of those. Sign up. Use the sign-up code AWESEMO and get $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points and get into some of these big contests coming up for NBA and, of course, for Week 8 of the NFL. That is Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, sponsor of the Deeper Dive. Oh, and they now, I think they have CSV upload, and they're going to have CSV edit coming up. It should be this week. So keep an eye out for that if you're someone that likes to play a good amount of lineups in these contests. And use the sign-up code AWESEMO. Sign up through us with that link, the NFL tab. Click on the primetime article. It's right there. Get your YSRPs up to $30 upon depositing. All right, Sal. Let's bang out tight ends, and we'll head out for the day. I got to write some NBA. George Kittle, Darren Waller, Austin Hooper with no Mohamed Sanu anymore, Evan Ingram, Zach Ertz. All of these guys on DraftKings are above 5,000. Kittle, Waller, Hooper, Ingram, and Ertz. Kittle's the most expensive here. The price tag is a little strange to me with Kittle. especially given that he's had a couple good games. But should he really be that much more expensive than Austin Hooper and Evan Ingram? I don't know. I'll let you be the judge of that.
No, he shouldn't be that much more expensive. I think that he's obviously deserving of the price, but so are those other guys then. So I'll take the price discounts. Still have interest in Kittle, but right now when it comes to these tight ends above 5K, I think they're all very much in play. I think I prefer Austin Hooper the most if Matt Ryan plays, and we'll see what that comes out to, because with Mohamed Sanu out, I think I have even more interest in Austin Hooper running in the middle of the field to now see probably more volume. So I have the most interest in Hooper with the caveat that Matt Ryan would have to play. And then I like Darren Waller just as much. Like these, so pretty much Waller, Hooper, Ingram will probably be the three guys that I have the most of. I imagine I have the most Hooper, then Waller, then Ingram, and then there'll be a slight drop off to guys like Ertz and Kittle and Hunter Henry.
All right.
It's like a tight pool of 6 players that I don't think you have to get cute. I know Josh Hill might be playing Arizona and people want to do that, but I probably won't get there.
I don't really have any interest in Ertz until they find out how to get him the football.
Yeah, it's fair. It is also like the worst environment, at least I think, in football. I know New England and the Superdome for the Saints is very bad, but I think going into Buffalo at this point when it's getting colder is probably like that stadium is, I've been there once and it was Aaron Rodgers' worst career game ever. So I'm probably biased, but that stadium is just like, it is a college football stadium when it comes to Sundays there.
All right. Any cheap options here? Is there anything below that stands out? I mean, the pretty easy or quick answer at least is not really. And, years past, even last year, it was really easy for us to be like, hey, you know what? I'm going to punt and I'm going to get cheaper at tight end. There is not a lot here. I mean, if you wanted to make an argument for like Dallas Goedert, maybe you could do that, but it's a difficult matchup. I don't know if there's any real cheap options that stand out even a little bit. Maybe you have a player or two, and I'm talking about like below that $3,500 range.
Yeah, below the $3,500 range, really nothing outside of if Jared Cook misses again, you have Josh Hill in a beneficial matchup with a good team total, and he was targeted, scores a touchdown last week at 3,200, but that's exactly what that is. It's a punt that if he gets you 3 points, don't be surprised. If he has like 10 to 12 points for you, like you take that and you run with it. But it's a complete punt. More times than not, it doesn't pay off, and it paid off last week, so you might not want to be a little bit point chasey there. Yeah, below $3,000, not much. Like Luke Wilson, I was hoping to see a better role for him. We didn't see much of that at all. Filling in for Will Dissly, then there's nothing down there. Chris Herndon, we can track his status coming into Sunday's game. He was doubtful, really had no chance of playing last night. But we'll track his status at 3,500 exactly. He's probably the one guy because we know what his upside is. At least I believe I know what his upside is from a limited sample. But it's nothing really below Gerald Everett. Like Everett would be the quote unquote punt, but even then it's $4,300.
All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for us, Sal. Anything else to add here on this First Look Tuesday?
No, I think that once again, we have quarterback options and now they're in the upper tier. And then I think you have a lot of value at wide receiver. And it scares me to think that the Tennessee Titans might be a stack that I have a good amount of, but we'll see come Sunday.
All right. Well, that'll do it for us. Hey, before you head out, if you enjoy the show, you want to help support us at Awesemo so we can keep doing free content like this at youtube.com. Give us a thumbs up, like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell as well. We appreciate you, and good things will happen to you as a result, or so I've been told. Sal, where can they find you before we get out of here?
Yeah, you can find me here on the Awesemo channel on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 11 a.m. Twitter is at Sal Vetri DFS if you want to give me a follow over there. And then I have a YouTube channel, just my name, Sal Vetri, same as it appears probably on this, the little at Twitter below my face. So that's where you can find me.
All right. Appreciate you guys hanging out. As always, Sal Vetri, and I'll be back on Thursday with a full game-by-game breakdown. I'll be back here tomorrow with Chris Spags, taking a first look at ownership and a lot more on the NFL Strategy Show. We've got a ton of programming coming up today. The NBA Strategy Show already in the books. And I'll put it to you this way. I'll make it very easy. Just don't go anywhere. Well, you could go somewhere right now, but make sure to come back, because it's going to be a busy, busy, busy day at youtube.com/Awesemo and on the Awesemo site. Use that sign-up code NFL Strategy for 50% off your first month. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Good luck tonight. First night of NBA.